Hey, you're not going to want to miss our podcast today. We're talking about the age-old discussion between character and competence. Do our leaders in America need to be moral? Do they need to be people of virtue? Or is it just important that they're great technicians, they're great at public policy, they're great at getting things done? These are important questions, and we're going to deal with three prominent examples from history today, all of which inspired our founding fathers to be men of principle. And we're going to understand the important connection between virtue and our private lives and the strength of the republic that we have been handed. All right, so you're not going to want to miss this podcast today. We hope that you'll join us.
Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Where we have fun every day, even before you guys get to watch us. We're having fun already. And this podcast is going to be more than fun. This is an important podcast. We are talking about the importance of moral leadership today and how critical that is to the health of a republic. And as we were chit-chatting, I can't think of a more relevant topic, and I guess a more sobering topic, because I look at what's going on in the American political arena right now, where we have the left filing indictment after indictment after indictment, hoping something sticks. And then on the right, we're trying to expose all of this, what's the word? Proof, evidence, whatever, that the administration has been incredibly compromised and corrupt. And so you got this massive political mudslinging happening on both sides. I don't know who's running our country or what important decisions are being made, because coming up now what are we, 2 years out from the next election?
A year and a few months.
Yeah. So anyway, we're still out from the election, and yet we're already positioning and posturing and ramping ourselves up for what I assume is going to be a massive political circus like we've never seen in American history. So this whole issue of character and morality and what it means, how important it is to leadership, is critical. And I guess it brings us back to the age-old question that came up, I remember during the Clinton administration, and I guess even before that, I was just a boy. But I remember when the whole Nixon Watergate came out, and the issue that was raised was, how important is character as it relates to competence? Like character, competence, and if someone is a good leader, can they be a scoundrel in other areas of their life and still we still have them lead? For instance, the argument was made about Nixon's geopolitical expertise. But the problem was he lied and he cheated. And then you get to Bill Clinton, of course, and it was like, hey, the guy's a great leader, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just turn our eyes on his, sexual indiscretions or whatever. Let's talk about that a little bit, because this is a heated debate in America. It hasn't gone away. I think people would still be as passionate about either side today. But explain to our listeners kind of the argument as it goes, as opposed to, I guess, making the divorce between the two and acting like they can be compartmentalized.
Right. And the argument Aaron Metaxas is making in this book, if you can keep it, that's the book we're going through, is basically saying a nation will cease to exist, will fall apart when we have lost the sense of morality in our leaders. There needs to be some type of common morality.
In fact, this is how he says it. How might their character or lack of it come into play with regard to our ability to keep the fragile republic of ordered freedoms entrusted to us? So he's saying this: the republic is already fragile. We've already talked about these things that are necessary. How critical is it that character of our leaders is in that mix if we're to sustain the republic that we've been given? Absolutely.
And his argument is this is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
This is very crucial. And so the debate that you were referring to is competence versus character. If someone gets the job done and in their quote unquote personal life, they have some indiscretions and whatnot, then why does it even matter? And that's the discussion,
And as we found, our founders believed that a man's personal character really, really mattered. And Metaxas makes a great quote here. He said, when the founders were advocating for liberty, their single most quoted source was the Bible, which of course tells us something about their thoughts on the importance of virtue. So that's an important takeaway. the founders' number one source for authority was the Scripture. And of course, the Scripture lays out very clearly the importance of character and moral virtue. But he goes on and mentions something else. He said the second most quoted source was the French political philosopher Montesquieu, who wrote that, quote, bad examples can be worse than crimes. He continued, more states have perished because of a violation of their mores than because of the violation of their laws. Talk about that a little bit. Bad examples can be worse than crimes.
Yeah, and if you think about it, it makes sense. When you have elected leader, it's not just like hiring an electrician to come to your house. You know, when you elect a leader, whether you like it or not, his or her personal life will be emulated by the masses to some degree. Okay, it's very hard to say, hey, this is
whatever the leader gets away with, so to speak.
Sure.
We interpret it as, wow, well, if it's not important to them, or they're in such a big position and they get away with it, then I guess it's not important for me. So you have a deterioration of the moral fabric of the society.
Well, we discussed this last week. We talked about athletes, right?
Yep.
And we used to just assume if you're a famous athlete, you are a role model. And then you have other athletes who says, I just want to play ball. I'm not a role model. But one could argue, and I would argue, when you get to that level of prestige, of notoriety, of media coverage, you don't have a choice.
Exactly.
You are a role model one way or another. So if you start doing things that's whatever, that's considered inappropriate or bad or evil, and you're just like, well, I didn't expect you to follow me. Well, that's what it comes with the territory. You don't have a choice in that.
And in a Republican form of government where our leaders are representatives, in other words, we as collectively voted them into office, so they represent us. So if they are living a certain way, and they represent us, then what does it say about us? It either means we elected the wrong person, or it means those of us share those same values elected that person, and he really is a microcosm of our collective virtue or lack thereof. Yeah. So there's no getting away with it. The health of the republic is going to be absolutely dependent upon the people who are representing the people. And if the representatives of the people are evil or corrupt or compromised, you're going to see the whole system fall apart. And that really is, I believe, what we're seeing happen right now. And we'll get into that toward the end of this chapter. But he goes into three examples from history that have been notable in terms of our republic. The first is a man by the name of Cincinnatus, and he talks about Cincinnatus and his plow. This was a leader in Roman culture who had retired basically and gone back to his farm and was at his plow when Rome was threatened. And they needed a great leader, and basically they came and pulled him out of retirement. And their way of doing that was simply saying, you know what, our nation is depending upon you. Our nation needs you. And so, the famous story is he left his plow. He went in, and their language became a dictator, which meant that not that he was mean and cruel, but that he had absolute power to lead the nation
against a crisis, invasion,
and a crisis. Yep. And as the story goes, it took 6 months, and he voluntarily gave up all that power that he had been entrusted with, and went back right to his plow and went back to his homestead and got about doing what he enjoyed doing. And I guess the thing that was such a powerful example to our founders was when people are given power, especially absolute power, and we know that absolute power can corrupt absolutely, right? So when you're given absolute power and you willingly put it back in the hands of the people who elected you, and you go back to being basically a normal citizen, that says a lot about the character of a man, because most people cannot handle that kind of power. Once they get it, it's like Lord of the Rings, right? Once you get the ring ends up consuming you. And so Cincinnatus was a model, not only to the Roman Republic, but a model to our founders as somebody who led well, served the country. He was not serving because of his own self-interest. He was serving because of the crisis. And then when he resolved the crisis through his outstanding leadership gift, he went right back to being a normal person. Mm-hmm. And our founders like that. They're like, wow, this is an incredible example of leadership, one that we should follow. In fact, his next example was Washington. And, we talked about Washington's exceptional character in our last episode, with the whole honesty and chopping down the cherry tree and all of that. And just Washington was not a perfect leader. None of us are. But he was known for being a man of outstanding character. So talk a little bit about the episode from Washington's life that Eric Metaxas highlights. We know a lot of his life and his great moments, Valley Forge and some of the great military battles and so forth. But toward the end of the Revolution, when miraculously we are moments away from celebrating the victory, there was almost a political coup that took place in America. And talk about Washington and his response.
Yeah, in an example that I think most people can understand, the Continental Army was, fighting in winter with no shoes on. I mean, they were giving their lives.
Footprints and everything else.
And I guess they haven't been paid in months, if not years. I don't know how long they have not been paid. And the Continental Congress, I think.
We were broke as a nation at the time.
So there's no money to pay them. So basically the Army, these officers are plotting a coup to say, hey, we're going to make Washington king, and we're going to basically dismantle the Congress, and we're going to declare ourselves the next
You can understand
rulers.
why they're disgruntled. And, the enemy likes to play off of our offenses, right? I mean, these guys have suffered greatly. They've paid the ultimate price for America, and they've gone without, and they have basically a promissory note from the government saying,
I owe you from the government,
and I owe you from a government that's broke because we're just beginning, and they're frustrated, and they called a private summons of all the military. And it didn't put any names attached to it, but basically they were saying, we're sick and tired of this, and we want to put our commanding officer, and they had that part of it right. Who best to lead the country than Washington? And he was offended by it, and Metaxas goes into great detail in the book of Washington's speech, but basically he appeals to a standard of righteousness and truth and to honor and love for country and he very eloquently rebukes his military leadership for even thinking at such a time. He casts it in the light of history and says, at the moment we're on the precipice of creating a nation for we the people, self-governed nation, you guys are looking to take us backwards into what we just fought to be delivered from, basically shame on you. Why would we stoop so low? And why would you want future generations to look back on what up to this point has been this amazing record of sacrifice and service and honor? Yeah. And now it's all going to be spoiled in one moment because you're upset because you don't have a paycheck right now.
And I think his words were recorded, and that part itself of his letter or his speech to them stunned me the most, because Washington, in the middle of all these battles, I mean, again, when you get to the war and battles, I mean, you get lost in the middle of that. But in the middle of this, he had a perspective of history and what they're doing. He was able to zoom in on specific, battles, but he's also able to zoom out and look at the context of the impact of what they're doing in history. And that's what really impressed me, because because the European nations all are looking at America and say, hey, they're doing something new. They're doing something extraordinary.
Right.
And we can't spoil this. And I was just like, wow, how did he not get lost in the middle of the hunger and the pain and the death and whatnot?
That's a good point.
I mean, it's amazing.
The sense of perspective that he had as a leader to kind of rise above the pain and all the suffering and the sacrifice, and to see their moment in history is exceptional. But Washington called them to a standard. It was a biblical standard. It was about being honorable. And I love the point that Eric Metaxas shares in that story when Washington went to read a letter and he could not read it, and he reached in his coat and he pulled out his spectacles, which I guess he never wore publicly or never showed that to his men. And as he had a moment of weakness, he basically said, hold on, guys, my eyes have grown old in this battle. So here's somebody who wasn't a politician. This is a guy that was sleeping out in the field right with them. Right. This is a guy that went through the deprivation and had horses shot out from underneath him. I mean, this is a guy that has the authority, the moral authority to speak and to challenge them to come higher. And as he puts his glasses on, it says tears were running down these soldiers' faces because it's like they realize, wow, he's paid the ultimate price. He's grown old fighting this battle, and he's the one calling us to do what's right and to do what's true. I can't imagine being in that moment like that, just that your own leader's frailty, that the price that he's paid physically is manifesting, and it's touching these guys. And so at that moment, literally the whole republic is hanging in the balance, because if they have a military coup, and they make him the next king, we're just like Great Britain 2.0.
Right.
And so, again, it was his moral courage and virtue that quelled that coup. That like Cincinnatus, I love it because you look back at Washington, he was basically called out of retirement after the war. He just wanted to go home. He just wanted to be on the farm. He just wanted to be at Mount Vernon and to do the things that he loved to do, which is just like Cincinnatus. So talk about the third example, making goodness fashionable, the example of William Wilberforce, because it was another powerful example of moral virtue and leadership.
Yeah, I think Aaron Metaxas was trying to sell his book, William Wilberforce, in this context. No, I'm just kidding. Not really. But
don't accuse him.
Don't accuse him of that. No, just kidding. He talked about the probably the greatest example, probably the most widely known example of morality from a political leadership that changed the nation was William Wilberforce, and most people know Wilberforce from his petition, from his campaign to end the slave trade, but he did so much more than that. I mean, he, like you said, he made good and fashionable, because Wilberforce realized that you can't, at some point, there's a limit to legislating how much morality. People say you can't legislate morality, and we will argue every law has a degree of morality in it. But he understands that at the end of the day, if the moral standards of people cannot raise to that bar, the laws will become obsolete. So he had...
and let's just pause there, because that's such a great point. Wilberforce had two major goals for his life. One was the abolition of the slave trade, and the other was what he called the reformation of manners. And you made a perfect illustration there, a connection, because as you pointed out, Wilberforce realized, and we use the example of slavery, you can pass laws to try to stop slavery, but if there is not a reformation of manners, in other words, if you don't deal with people's hearts and their morals and their character, you will never be able to pass enough laws to stop bad behavior. You have to be self-governed. You have to start on the inside. And so Wilberforce understood that if there was not a great awakening in Britain and a changing of people's hearts and values, they will never see slavery stop. And just this gave me hope. Because sometimes we look at the American culture and you think, man, we are so rotten to the core. And there are segments of our society where that is true. But this is why I still have incredible hope for our nation, because when you look back historically at what was happening in Britain during Wilberforce's time, we're not there yet, all right? So take a look at this. He said, there was open disregard and even active disdain for public and private morality in Great Britain. Public drunkenness, even on the very floor of the Parliament, was common. So you would have leaders that were stone cold drunk, stumbling around in Parliament during the session, which, again, I'm sure we've had episodes, but not like that. It was a time of open debauchery in every sphere of culture. Such behaviors were flaunted in terms of all kinds of immorality and perversion. And this was stunning to me. For one index of the cultural climate, we may recall that during this period in London, 25%, 1 out of 4 of all single women were prostitutes, and their average age was 16. I mean, this was acceptable. This was the way it was. 1 out of 4 young ladies were prostituting themselves, and the average age being 16. So that's just stunning. So Wilberforce is standing on the floor of Parliament with drunks. He's being mocked. And this was interesting. In those days, if you brought your private morality into public discussion, you were ridiculed. Like, who are you to be shoving your morality down our throats? And that's exactly what the left says to us today. If we try to suggest, hey, that is wrong. That is morally wrong. Right. The Bible says, or Jesus declares, or whatever. You're almost looked at like, who are you to bring your personal views into my public debauchery? Right. You know. But that's exactly what Wilberforce was facing, and he fought and fought and fought and fought and stood resolute. And I guess if there's any example of how character and leadership go hand in hand, I mean, Wilberforce is the positive side. Because he didn't have to put up with all that. There's easier things he could have done. But year in, year out, he fought those battles until finally he won. And it was, in fact, this book, which we're not going to go into another book study, but this is called A Practical View of Christianity, Personal Faith as a Call to Political Responsibility. This book, Colson writes the intro, Chuck Colson, and he says that it was Wilberforce's book that laid the tracks for the Second Great Awakening. So as you start reading this, and I was going back reviewing it today, I think I got about a third way through before I got distracted. But Wilberforce writes like a theologian, and he's a politician. I mean, he's going back to the fall of man and total depravity, and he's quoting scripture verses. I mean, that is a treatise on human depravity and the need for the gospel and reformation of our manners.
I mean, he and this, the sectum,
Clapham sect.
Clapham, sorry.
Yep.
Clapham sect. Clapham sect, right?
Yes.
It's a mouthful, it's British people. But they created all kinds of societies. Mm-hmm. They didn't just, sit around and just talk about it. They went out and they enacted laws. They created society. He recruited kind of the movers, shakers, business guys, political guys, educators, and
these societies were basically, groups that were raised up to fight a certain cause. We wouldn't use the word societies in our culture.
Yeah, it sounds like something dark, or no, it's not. It's just groups, humanitarian groups.
Wilberforce, I think himself was a part of like 69 different, of these societies. Everything committed to stopping the cruelty of animals, to helping the illiterate. The list goes on and on and on. And I love this. Wilberforce believed that there's no such thing as a private faith. If you have a genuine faith, it will express itself publicly in culture. And so again, the impact of private character and public service going hand in glove, that you cannot separate those. And of course, that's what Metaxas is highlighting. But let's go to the main point of this chapter. And Metaxas says this: what is more important still is that if at any point in a republic of self-government the people begin to distrust their leaders as somehow corrupt or as more concerned with themselves than those that they serve, the whole skein of self-government begins to unravel and is fatally threatened. That to me is a prophetic warning of where we are at today. I can't think of a time in my lifetime when people are distrusting everything that has to do with public leadership in our country, in every sector of leadership, the church, government, education. How about science? I've never seen where science and public health have ever been more, questioned and more distrust after the whole COVID debacle. So it's just interesting. So if we don't trust those who we have elected to represent us, then the whole republic begins to unravel. And so he says self-government cannot exist without virtuous leaders, which is the point that we're making. And here's some of the fallout. He says, in a self-government as the one bequeathed to us by our founders, bad examples among our leaders do something even worse than encourage a culture of vice in those they lead. They actually undermine people's faith in the larger order.
Yeah, I mean, that's prophetic.
This is where we're at today.
That's where we're at today.
In fact, we're sitting around right now, as you pointed out, between a year and 2 years away from the next election. And I think the average person, at least it's maybe in our world, is like, is my vote even going to count? Is the system so rigged that we can't really even trust the larger order, the system? Is government so broken that, you begin to get cynical? People begin to say, well, why am I paying taxes? Those that represent me have created every loophole, and they create laws that don't even apply to themselves. So why should I be honest at the end of the day? Why should I be honest when everybody representing me is not honest?
Right.
And when we hear this talked about a lot, a two-tiered system of justice. Like, okay, if they get away with these terrible crimes, then why should I be living under a separate set of laws? There is no justice. So there's no justice. There's no fairness. Everybody's out for themselves. When that's your approach to government, I mean, how long as a nation can you really survive? And I think that's the question Metaxas is asking. Like, how about this? Look at all the waste in government. Why would I give the government any of my tax dollars? I'm trying to feed my kids, right? And we're trying to raise families, feed our kids. Why should I give them one dime if all it is horrific waste? Or even now, when we're sending gazillions of dollars overseas to help other people's kids, but we're not even helping our own kids.
Or even a special interest group that you're going to pass this law, but it's all that pork attached for this program has nothing to do with our state or our community, and it's a special interest group that's going to vote. I mean, it's all handouts, right? You give them handout, you get votes.
Right now, where all this is up about the military budget. And there's so much, and of course, who doesn't think we should support our military? Everybody. That's like one of the few legitimate functions of government, right? Is protect your nation, at least of the federal government. So who's not for supporting and keeping a strong military? But the problem is there's so much other stuff that has nothing to do with that, with the military or with protecting our nation, that's thrown into that bill. Pork, as you mentioned, all these special projects, pork projects, that you look at this bloated bill, and then it's all a matter of optics at that point. Oh, Representative Ming, he is stopping the passage. He must not support our military. Well, no, you support the military. You're just revolting against a third of the bill, which is total waste. But it's all optics, politics, marketing. It's all about getting reelected. And people see all this, and they just go, is the system so broken that we just have to eject from the system, which of course is a terrible thing, because then people go, well, why should I vote? What does my vote matter? Why should I run for office? It's just a bunch of crooks. And so people withdraw from the very government that they are the people. They are the government. And now they're withdrawing from it. Or how about this one? This one gets me, still gets me fired up. When I'm watching our leftist leaders who are violating COVID protocol left and right, and they're on national television saying, we're all in this together.
Right.
And I'm thinking, we're not in this together. You guys have your own set of rules. You guys are still going out to eat with your cronies. You're getting your hair done at the beauty parlor while you're shutting down this lady over here because you're saying she's violating COVID policy, but the Speaker of the House is getting her hair done. I get so sick of this, we're all in this together, because we're not in this together, because contrary to the examples we just talked about, there is no sacrificial leadership. There are not leaders who are going first, that are sacrificing more, that are inspiring us to make great sacrifices. No, you're not doing any of that, but you have these little ridiculous slogans like we're all in this together. People are so disgusted with that kind of political hypocrisy, and everybody sees through the thin veil. There is, what we're motivated by is people who are willing to make the sacrifice first and then inspire us to it. I want to roll now, but how about all the global climate hysteria? When there's not one person spouting all this, climate concern that is actually practicing it themselves. They live in mansions. Their carbon footprint's greater than anybody else. They're flying in private jets. It's all a hoax. If they believed it, they would be practicing it, and they would be making the greatest sacrifices. But they're not doing that, which means it's a bunch of baloney. And I think the average person sees through it. How about this? We just saw our women's soccer team get ejected from the World Cup faster than any American team in the history of America. And I'll tell you what, when you talk to the average person on the street, when you see people who are there representing our country, who hate our country, who can't even cross their heart for the playing of the national anthem, nobody cares whether that team won, because that team hates our country, at least some of them, and does not represent us. And there's no pride in being an American when that's who's representing you, people that actually hate the country. So nobody cares that they got ejected earlier than anybody else, because Again, the average American could care less about watching a bunch of women soccer players who hate America representing us. And that's kind of what we feel across the board. We have politicians who hate America. We have leaders across the board who hate America. And there's just a lack of a sense of pride. So we have morale in the military, for instance, all-time low. Nobody wants to die and sacrifice for their country, right? Or pay the ultimate price for what it means to be the American Republic, because there's nothing worth sacrificing for. So there's no sense of patriotism. In fact, patriotism nowadays is viewed as nationalism. You're like a little Hitler zombie running around if you love your country. So you can see there's just a corrosiveness that happens when our leaders have no character. And it gets back to the point you made at the start of this podcast. Character and leadership go hand in hand. If you lack character in your private life, you're going to make some serious mistakes in public life, and the whole thing just starts to corrode like its acid has been poured over it.
Yeah.
He says one of the most fragile parts of our fragile system of ordered liberties is the necessity of a basic trust between the people and their leaders. And I think that basic trust is lacking right now. We're really looking for somebody that we can believe in again and who's going to care for us. That's why I think, you and I have talked about this. I think the secret sauce behind the Trump campaign has been the fact that Americans, by large numbers, you're looking at the people that are following him and that are filling stadiums, truly believe, number one, that our president loves this country and that our president understands the average American, how the average American thinks, and this complete lack of trust in our government, and looking for somebody that's going to care for us, and it's going to care for our issues, and it's going to care for our country, and actually love our country.
And there's a reason why, with every single indictment of Donald Trump, his poll ratings goes up. What does that say? That says there's a major distrust in the established government, whether it's D or R, major distrust. At the same time, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend,
Yep.
When the established government start attacking him more and more, especially on claims that very obviously even liberal attorneys are saying there's no basis to these lawsuits. Normal people like myself and others can say, wait a second, maybe this is the guy I can trust, right? Because at this point, that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for someone who's going to be the perfect next coming of Jesus Christ, because right now in our government, we don't have anybody close to that. We're looking for someone who has a degree of authenticity,
Yep.
and so that we can possibly trust them,
Yep.
right? And that's what all those numbers indicate to America. So this is not theoretical. This is very real, very practical right now.
Very real, and it's everywhere. And you go back to the other thing too about using government for your own enrichment. The average person is going, wait a minute, why are we attacking people who made their money running successful businesses and living the American dream? Why are we not investigating politicians who came into office at a certain level of wealth and are leaving office 4 or 5 times the wealth? They leave office as millionaires. Mm-hmm. How does that happen when you're a public servant? And public servants are not known for making whopper salaries. So where did all that money come from? We're asking all of the wrong questions, and I think the average American gets it. It's like, how did you get into office, and now you're a gazillionaire? Well, insider trading, corruption, all of these other things that happen when people of bad character use public office to enrich themselves. And at some point, people get sick and tired of it all, and we have another revolution. I'm not talking about a bloody revolution or a violent revolution, but I'm talking about a revolution of we the people, when we just say, you know what, we're sick of it. And sometimes it means the Cincinnatus, who's at home, running his farm, says, you know what, we have need of somebody like you because you're a person of character. And we get some people that are not part of the elite crowd that make their way into office and all of a sudden do some really, really great things because people start believing in them and honoring their sacrifice and their character and their integrity and leadership. So we really do need an awakening. And it gets back to our point that we made all along. That awakening does not happen in the halls of Congress. It happens in the Church of Jesus Christ, and it happens at the grassroots level. And that, I think, is the only hope that we have. We've got to change the manners, as Wilberforce said. before we can get rid of the terrible things that are happening in our country, the bad behaviors. We got to get the heart healed first of all. So, an important chapter, a great book. We hope you'll continue to pick up some of these books we're recommending to you. Do your own personal study. We, the people, are the government, and so at the end of the day, how we vote and how we're engaged and what we do and how we live our lives and what we say and our values matter and your faith matters and the Bible matters and principles matter, so don't ever let people shame you. Let me just say this. There's nothing new under the sun. They will always try to shame us for wanting to bring Christian values and Jesus Christ and virtue into the public arena. Take that as a compliment from those who disagree with you when they start throwing that in your face. And never forget that somebody's values are going to be, brought into every public arena. So don't be ashamed of bringing yours in. In fact, they're needed more than ever at such a time as this. So again, we hope this is helpful for you today. Your personal life matters. Your private character matters, and our nation as a republic is sustained by the private character of its citizens. So let's be virtuous this week. Let's do what's right. Let's love Jesus and love our neighbor. And you got any final volley on that?
Nothing final.
I was fired up this morning, I guess a little bit. I'm sorry if I hogged the microphone.
No, you're good.
All right.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll look forward to being back with you next Thursday. Until then, let's keep living for Jesus.